What if everything you were taught in history class is only half the story? Imagine for a second that the timeline of human evolution isn't a straight, natural line, but a massive puzzle with missing pieces. Pieces that were perhaps deliberately hidden. We look around today and see our massive cities, our advanced technology, and our dominant place on Earth. But how did we get here so fast? For the longest time, our ancestors were just hunting and gathering, simply trying to survive the harsh wilderness. And then, seemingly overnight, boom, we suddenly had complex mathematics, written laws, advanced astronomy, and towering cities. Conventional history books call it a sudden miracle of human progress. But ancient clay tablets buried in the sands of the Middle East tell a very different, much more shocking story. They speak of the Anunnaki, a name that translates roughly to those who from heaven to earth came. In this video, we are going on a massive, eye-opening journey together. And don't worry, you don't need a degree in archaeology or genetics to understand any of this. We are going to break it all down simply and look at the clues left behind in plain sight. We will travel from the dusty deserts of ancient Sumeria to the very DNA coding inside your own body. We will explore impossible ancient monuments that we still can't build today, mysterious blood types that baffle doctors, and bizarre ancient legends from all over the world that share the exact same details. Finally, we will ask the ultimate question: did these ancient gods ever really leave? Or are their descendants quietly walking among us right now, pulling the strings from the highest seats of power? Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. The visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Let's begin. Let us take a journey back in time. I want you to close your eyes and picture the world roughly 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. For hundreds of thousands of years before this point, the story of human evolution was incredibly slow. In fact, it was practically standing still. Our ancestors were primitive hunter-gatherers. They lived in small, nomadic tribes, following herds of animals just to avoid starvation. They wore animal skins, they used sharp rocks to cut their food, and their primary focus every single day was simply not dying. Progress was measured in tiny, agonizing steps. Figuring out how to control fire took thousands of generations. Figuring out how to make a slightly sharper spearhead took thousands more. Then suddenly the timeline breaks. Out of nowhere, in a region known as Mesopotamia, which sits in modern-day Iraq between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a civilization exploded into existence. We call them the Sumerians. This wasn't a slow, gradual evolution from cave dwelling to city building. It was like flipping a light switch in a dark room. Boom. Almost overnight, in the grand scheme of history, these people stopped wandering the wilderness and started building massive, towering cities with complex infrastructures. And they didn't just build mud huts, they built gigantic, stepped pyramids called ziggurats that reached into the sky. They invented the wheel, they invented the plow to farm on a massive scale. They created complex irrigation canals to control the river waters. They built sailboats to travel and trade. But it goes so much deeper than just physical inventions. The Sumerians suddenly had a complex legal system with judges and juries. They had doctors who understood the medicinal properties of plants. Most mind-blowing of all, they had advanced mathematics and astronomy. They invented the base 60 mathematical system. Does that sound familiar? It should. It is the exact same system we still use today to measure time. The fact that you have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour and 360 degrees in a circle that comes directly from the ancient Sumerians. They also mapped out the stars, completely charting the heavens and identifying the planets in our solar system long before the invention of the modern telescope. Now, any logical person has to stop and ask, how? How does a species go from grunting in caves and hitting rocks together to mapping the cosmos and drafting complex legal contracts in the blink of an eye? It is like giving a toddler a pile of dirt and returning an hour later to find they have built a perfectly functioning sports car. It simply does not make sense within the traditional, slow-moving framework of human evolution. If you ask modern historians, they will shrug and call it a miracle of human ingenuity. But here is the most fascinating part. If you ask the Sumerians themselves how they got so smart so fast, they did not take the credit. They never claimed, "We figured this out because we are brilliant." Instead, they pointed to the sky. They left behind millions of clay tablets carved with a wedge-shaped writing system called cuneiform. When modern scholars finally figured out how to translate these ancient texts in the 19th and 20th centuries, they found detailed historical records, and the Sumerians explicitly wrote down that all their knowledge, all their laws, and all their technology was a gift. It was handed down to them by a group of beings they called the Anunnaki. The word Anunnaki literally translates to those who from heaven to earth came. To the Sumerians, these were not invisible, magical spirits floating on clouds. They were physical, tangible beings. They were described as flesh and blood, just much taller, much stronger, and vastly more intelligent than the local humans. The ancient tablets describe them walking among the people, eating, drinking, getting angry, and managing the day-to-day operations of their cities. The Sumerians drew pictures of them in stone reliefs, giants with majestic beards, wearing strange wristwatches and holding bizarre devices that look suspiciously like modern technology. But why were they here? If the Anunnaki were highly advanced space travelers capable of crossing the galaxy, why would they come to a muddy, primitive planet like Earth? According to the ancient Sumerian texts, they were not here on a sightseeing vacation. They were here on a desperate, high-stakes corporate mining mission. And the resource they were looking for is the exact same resource that drives human greed today: gold. To understand why they needed gold, we have to talk about where they came from. The Sumerian tablets describe the Anunnaki's home as a planet called Nibiru. You might have heard it referred to in modern conspiracy theories as Planet X or the 12th planet. According to the ancient records, Nibiru is a very real planet within our own extended solar system, but it was facing a terrifying environmental crisis. Imagine our modern-day fears about climate change and the destruction of the ozone layer, but multiplied by 1,000. Nibiru's atmosphere was failing. Its protective shield was degrading, meaning the planet was slowly freezing, and its inhabitants were being exposed to deadly cosmic radiation. The Anunnaki scientists realized there was only one way to save their home world. They needed to create an artificial shield in their upper atmosphere to reflect the sun's rays and trap the heat inside. And the best material for reflecting radiation, universally, is gold. This isn't just ancient fantasy, this is actually sound modern science. Today, NASA uses real gold on the visors of astronaut helmets to protect their eyes from solar radiation. We use thin layers of gold on our satellites and space telescopes for the exact same reason. Gold is highly malleable, it doesn't tarnish, and it is a perfect reflector of radiation. The Anunnaki needed to mine thousands of tons of gold, crush it into a superfine microscopic white powder, often called monatomic gold, and release it into their atmosphere to heal their dying planet. The problem was Nibiru was running out of gold, so they sent exploration ships out into the solar system. When they scanned Earth, they hit the jackpot. Our planet was incredibly rich in gold, especially in the regions we now know as Southern Africa, and so a massive expedition was launched, led by two royal brothers, a brilliant scientist named Enki and a strict military commander named Enlil. The Anunnaki splashed down on Earth. They set up their first headquarters in Mesopotamia, which they called Eden, sound a bit like the biblical Garden of Eden. And they sent their working-class astronauts down into the harsh mines of Africa to start digging. Now you might be wondering, if Nibiru is in our solar system, why don't we see it in the sky right now? Why hasn't NASA snapped a clear photo of it? The Sumerians explained this with astonishing astronomical detail. Nibiru does not have a normal circular orbit like Earth, Mars, or Venus. Instead, it has what astronomers call a highly elliptical orbit. Think of the shape of a stretched-out rubber band or the path of a comet. For the vast majority of its orbit, Nibiru travels deep into the dark, freezing uncharted edges of deep space, far beyond Pluto. It is totally invisible to us, hiding in the dark abyss where the sun's light barely reaches. But like a cosmic boomerang, the gravity of our sun eventually pulls it back in. It slingshots back through the inner solar system before heading out into the dark again. According to the Sumerian texts, one complete orbit of Nibiru takes roughly 3,600 Earth years. They called this orbital period a Shah. This simple mathematical difference in planetary orbits explains something that has confused scholars for centuries: the so-called immortality of the ancient gods. Think about it like this. If you live on Earth, it takes 365 days for your planet to go around the sun. That is 1 year of your life. But if you were born on Nibiru, 1 single year of your life, one trip around the sun, takes 3,600 Earth years. So an Anunnaki commander who is just 100 Nibiru years old would have been alive for 360,000 Earth years. To the primitive humans watching these beings, the Anunnaki never seemed to age. Generations upon generations of humans would live, grow old, and die in the blink of an eye, while the Anunnaki masters looked exactly the same. To a human whose lifespan was maybe 40 years, a being who lives for hundreds of thousands of years is indistinguishable from an immortal, all-powerful God. So here we have the setup. Highly advanced beings from a dying planet with a bizarre orbit come to Earth. They set up command centers in the Middle East and sprawling, back-breaking gold mines in southern Africa. But mining gold is hard, grueling work. The working-class Anunnaki, a group known as the Igigi, were forced to toil deep underground for thousands of years. Eventually, the labor became too much. The ancient texts tell us that the Igigi went on strike. They surrounded the house of the commander, Enlil, and burned their tools, refusing to dig another ounce of gold from the mud. The Anunnaki leadership had a massive crisis on their hands. They still needed the gold to save their home planet, but their own people refused to mine it. They needed a new workforce. They needed a slave race, something smart enough to take orders and use tools, but docile enough to not fight back. And as we are about to see, they didn't have to look far. Down in the wild plains of Earth, a primitive, hairy, grunting creature was already walking around, a creature we call Homo erectus. All the Anunnaki had to do was give this wild creature a little upgrade. Most of us grew up learning the exact same fundamental story in our high school biology classes. We learned about a brilliant man named Charles Darwin who sailed around the world in the 1800s, observed birds on the Galapagos Islands, and gave us the theory of evolution. The basic rule of this theory is incredibly simple to understand: survival of the fittest. Animals slowly, very slowly, adapt to their environments over millions and millions of years. If a giraffe is born with a slightly longer neck and can reach more leaves on a tall tree, it survives, it has babies, and it passes on that long neck trait. Nature is slow, it is blind, it takes its absolute time. Watching natural evolution happen is like watching a massive stone mountain being carved away by a gentle breeze. It takes millions of years of tiny, accidental mutations. For 99% of the animal kingdom, this theory works perfectly. You can look at the fossil record of a horse or a whale and trace its slow, gradual changes over millions of years. But when we look at our own species, human beings, the timeline completely shatters. If we follow the traditional, accepted timeline of history, there is a glaring, massive hole. You have probably heard the famous term, the missing link. For over a century, scientists and archaeologists have been desperately digging in the dirt, trying to find the fossilized bones that perfectly bridge the gap between our primitive, ape-like ancestors and modern humans, Homo sapiens. But they cannot find it. Why? Because the jump from a primitive, grunting hominid to a modern human did not happen slowly. It happened in an evolutionary flash. Let us talk about the human brain. For millions of years, the brains of our early ancestors, like Australopithecus, were relatively small. They were roughly the size of a modern chimpanzee's brain. These creatures lived, they survived, and their brain size barely changed at all for over 2 million years. Then, suddenly, seemingly out of nowhere, the hominid brain exploded in size. It doubled, and then it tripled. The cerebral cortex, the outer layer of the brain responsible for complex thought, spoken language, art, and mathematics, grew so incredibly fast that it literally had to fold in on itself, creating deep wrinkles just to fit inside our skulls. From a purely biological and survival standpoint, this sudden, massive brain growth makes absolutely no sense. Why? Because the brain is a massive energy hog. Even though your brain only makes up about 2% of your total body weight, it burns a massive 20% of your daily calories. For a primitive creature fighting starvation on the dangerous African savanna, having a massive calorie-burning brain is a terrible survival strategy. Nature does not randomly give an animal a luxury it cannot afford. Furthermore, this giant brain made childbirth incredibly dangerous for humans compared to other animals. The head of a human baby is almost too large to safely pass through the birth canal. Why would blind, random, natural evolution suddenly select for a giant brain that burns far too much energy and endangers mothers during childbirth? It is like taking a reliable, fuel-efficient bicycle and suddenly dropping a massive, heavy, gas-guzzling jet engine onto it. It doesn't fit the slow, practical rules of Darwin's nature. It looks less like a random mutation and much more like a deliberate, sudden, artificial upgrade. But the smoking gun, the ultimate proof that something completely unnatural happened to our species, is hiding right now inside every single cell of your body. To understand this, we needed to take a very simple look at DNA. You do not need a medical degree for this. Just think of your DNA as a massive instruction manual that tells your body exactly how to build you. This instruction manual is divided into chapters. In science, we call these chapters chromosomes. Every single species on Earth has a specific number of chromosomes. If we truly evolved directly from a common ancestor alongside the great apes, like chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans, our genetic instruction manuals should look incredibly similar. And for the most part, they do. We share roughly 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees, but there is a massive, glaring problem that geneticists cannot easily explain away. All the great apes have 24 pairs of chromosomes. They have 48 chapters in their genetic book. Humans, however, only have 23 pairs. We only have 46 chapters. If we slowly evolve from the exact same family tree, where did the missing pair go? You cannot simply lose an entire chromosome and survive. Losing that much genetic information would be catastrophic to a living organism. It would be like ripping a whole vital chapter out of a car's assembly manual. The car simply wouldn't run. For decades, this missing chromosome completely baffled the scientific community. But when geneticists finally mapped the human genome in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, they found the answer. And the answer is terrifyingly precise. The missing chromosome didn't vanish into thin air. It was fused together. Welcome to the greatest biological mystery of our time. Human chromosome number 2. When geneticists looked closely at human chromosome 2 under highly advanced microscopes, they realized it is exceptionally large. When they scanned the genetic coding inside it, they made a shocking discovery. Human chromosome 2 is actually 2 completely separate ape chromosomes seamlessly welded together. Let me explain how incredibly bizarre this is using a simple analogy. Imagine you have 2 standard shoelaces. The plastic tips at the ends of the shoelaces are called telomeres. They stop the shoelace from unraveling. In the exact middle of the shoelace is a thick knot called a centromere. If you look at an ape's DNA, you see 2 separate shoelaces, each with their own plastic tips at the ends and their own knots in the middle. But when you look at human chromosome 2, you see something that looks exactly like it was done in a high-tech laboratory. The 2 shoelaces have been placed perfectly end to end. The plastic tips, the telomeres in the middle, have been neatly fused together. And even crazier, one of the original middle knots, the centromeres, has been deliberately switched off or silenced, so the new giant chromosome functions perfectly as one single piece without tearing itself apart during cell division. In the natural world, chromosomal fusion is incredibly rare, and when it does happen naturally by accident, it is usually incredibly messy, causing severe diseases, birth defects, or genetic disorders. But human chromosome 2 is perfectly clean. It is a masterpiece of genetic engineering. It looks exactly like 2 pieces of Lego were snapped together. The extra connector pieces were neatly trimmed off, and the whole thing was glued perfectly in place so the human body could function at a vastly higher level of intelligence. How does a sudden, perfect genetic fusion happen at the exact same time our hominid brains mysteriously tripled in size? How do we go from primitive apes hitting rocks together to building towering pyramids and mapping the stars in an evolutionary blink of an eye? Modern science waves its hand and calls it a lucky biological accident. But let us go back to the ancient Sumerian clay tablets. Remember the Anunnaki? Remember how the working-class Anunnaki, the Igigi, went on a massive strike because mining gold in the harsh African heat was too difficult and exhausting? The Sumerian texts tell us exactly what happened next to solve this labor crisis. The leader of the Earth expedition, the strict commander Enlil, went to his brother Enki. Enki was the chief scientist, the master of biology and water. The ancient texts say Enki proposed a brilliant, slightly terrifying solution. He said, "Let us create a primitive worker." He noted that a creature already existed on Earth, the primitive, wild hominid Homo erectus. All the Anunnaki had to do was bind the image of the gods onto it. According to the translations of these ancient clay tablets, Enki teamed up with the chief medical officer, a brilliant female Anunnaki named Ninhursag. They took the primitive, hairy creature of Earth, and in a facility they literally called the House of Life, they began experimenting. They took the earthly DNA of Homo erectus, and they spliced it, fused it, and combined it with the advanced, divine DNA of the Anunnaki themselves. They didn't just let nature take its course, they played God. They artificially accelerated our evolution, cleanly fusing our chromosomes, forcefully expanding our brain capacity, and turning a wild animal into a highly intelligent, capable worker. They needed a creature smart enough to understand verbal commands, use complex tools, and mine gold, but disconnected enough from the cosmos to remain a loyal, unquestioning servant. They called their successful creation the Adamu. Does that name sound familiar to you? The Adamu, the first man. The similarities to the biblical story of Adam being created from the dust of the earth in the image of God are absolutely impossible to ignore. But in the Sumerian version, which was written thousands of years before the Bible, God was a team of alien geneticists, and the Garden of Eden was a highly advanced biological testing lab. This ancient story explains absolutely everything that modern science struggles to answer. It explains why there is a missing link in the fossil record. There was no slow transition. It was a sudden, artificial genetic jump. It explains why our brains grew so fast that they endangered our own survival. It explains the flawless, laboratory-like fusion of human chromosome 2. We are not the slow, accidental product of Earth's natural evolution. We are a hybrid species. We are part earthly primate and part extraterrestrial god. We are a genetically engineered masterpiece, originally created to labor in the dirt. But as we will soon discover, the Anunnaki left more than just a fused chromosome inside our bodies. They left another biological marker, a strange, undeniable anomaly flowing through the veins of millions of people alive today. A blood type that makes absolutely no evolutionary sense and might just be the direct, undeniable royal bloodline of the gods themselves. If you have ever been to a hospital for surgery, or if you have ever donated blood, you know that your blood is not just a simple red liquid. It is a highly complex biological fingerprint. In the early 20th century, scientists made a massive breakthrough when they discovered that human blood is divided into 4 main groups, AB, and O. This discovery was incredible because it finally allowed doctors to perform safe blood transfusions. But as scientists looked closer through their microscopes, they found something else hiding in the red blood cells. They found a tiny, specific protein. They named this protein the rhesus factor, or the RH factor for short. Why did they name it that? Because they first discovered this exact same genetic protein in the blood of the rhesus macaque monkey. This made perfect sense to mainstream biologists. If we follow Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, human beings and apes share a common earthly ancestor. Therefore, it is completely logical that we would share the exact same blood proteins with other primates. Today, roughly 85% of the entire global human population has this monkey protein in their blood. When you look at your blood type, if there is a plus sign next to it, like A positive, B positive, or O positive, that means you have the rhesus monkey factor. It means your DNA is perfectly tied to the natural evolutionary chain of planet Earth. You are biologically connected to the earthly primate family tree. But what about the other 15% of the human population? This is where the story takes a sharp, mysterious turn that completely breaks the rules of natural biology. 15% of humans are Rh negative. If you have a minus sign next to your blood type, like O negative or A negative, it means you completely lack this earthly monkey protein. It is not just sleeping or hidden, it is entirely missing from your genetic code. Now, mainstream science tries to brush this off by simply calling it a random genetic mutation. They claim that somewhere along the timeline, human biology simply made a copying error and forgot to include this protein. But if you talk to independent geneticists and researchers, they will tell you that this explanation is heavily flawed. In nature, mutations usually happen for a reason, to help an organism adapt and survive. Erasing an entire genetic link to your evolutionary ancestors does not help you survive. It actually does the exact opposite. To understand why the Rh negative blood type is such a massive biological mystery, we have to look at the one place where nature demands perfect harmony: a mother's womb. The ultimate driving goal of all biology on planet Earth is reproduction. The continuation of the species is the #1 rule of nature. A mother's body is naturally designed to be the ultimate safe haven, a perfect incubator that protects, feeds, and nurtures a growing baby. But when we look at Rh negative mothers, this fundamental rule of nature completely collapses. If a woman with Rh negative blood gets pregnant, and the father of the baby is Rh positive, there is a very high chance the baby will also be Rh positive. When this happens, a terrifying biological war begins inside the mother's womb. Because the mother's blood completely lacks the rhesus protein, her immune system does not recognize the baby growing inside her. In fact, her body looks at the Rh positive baby and sees it as a completely foreign, toxic threat. Her immune system reacts to her own child exactly the same way it would react to a dangerous virus, a deadly parasite, or a bacterial infection. The mother's body sounds the alarm and starts producing an army of deadly antibodies. These antibodies are like microscopic security guards programmed to seek and destroy. They cross the placenta, enter the baby's bloodstream, and begin aggressively attacking the baby's red blood cells, trying to destroy the fetus. In the medical world, this terrifying condition is called hemolytic disease of the newborn. Today, modern medicine can stop this tragedy by injecting the mother with a special serum called RhoGAM. But thousands of years ago, before modern hospitals existed, this biological rejection meant that Rh negative women had extreme difficulty having more than one child with an Rh positive man. Their own bodies would simply terminate the pregnancies. Let us stop and think about this logically. Nowhere else in the entire natural animal kingdom does a mother's body actively hunt down and try to kill her own natural offspring. It simply does not happen. Nature would never design a system that deliberately sabotages its own reproduction. So, when does this kind of violent immune system rejection actually happen in the real world? It only happens when we humans artificially interfere with nature. It happens when we take two completely different species and forcefully crossbreed them. For example, if you take a horse and breed it with a donkey, you get a mule. If you breed a lion and a tiger, you get a liger. These hybrid animals are genetic anomalies. They are not meant to exist in nature. Because they are unnatural mixtures of two different species, their immune systems clash, their biology is confused, and the offspring are almost always born completely sterile, unable to reproduce. If a natural human mother rejects a natural human baby because their blood types are violently incompatible, are we truly looking at a simple mutation, or are we actually looking at the lingering evidence of two completely different humanoid species trying to breed? This brings us right back to the ancient Sumerian clay tablets and the Anunnaki. Remember the story of Enki, the alien scientist who took the primitive Rh positive Earth hominid and spliced its DNA to create the perfect worker, the Adamu? The worker class was given the blood of Earth. But the Anunnaki themselves, the ancient gods who came from the sky, did not evolve from earthly monkeys. They did not have the rhesus protein. Their blood was entirely different. Is it possible that Rh negative blood is the unbroken, unmutated genetic legacy of the Anunnaki themselves? Did some of these ancient astronauts interbreed with human women, passing down a bloodline that is literally out of this world? When we look at the physical and psychological traits of people who carry the Rh negative blood type today, this ancient astronaut theory becomes even more convincing. Rh negative individuals often possess a very specific, bizarre cluster of physical characteristics that make them stand out from the rest of the human population. First, let us look at their physical bodies. Many people with Rh negative blood naturally run colder than the rest of us. They have lower core body temperatures. Along with this, they often have lower resting blood pressure and a lower heart rate. It is almost as if their internal biological engine is tuned to operate in a completely different, perhaps slightly colder environment, like an alien planet with a different atmosphere, perhaps similar to the ancient descriptions of the planet Nibiru. But the strange physical anomalies do not stop there. A shockingly high percentage of Rh negative people are born with an extra vertebra in their spine, right at the tailbone. Sometimes it is an extra rib. Why would a specific blood type directly correlate with having extra bones in your skeletal structure? Then there is the sensitivity to sunlight. Rh negative individuals often have highly sensitive vision and pale skin that burns easily in the sun. But the most striking feature is their eyes. A vast majority of Rh negative people have piercing light-colored eyes, deep blues, vibrant greens, or shifting hazel colors that seem to change depending on their mood or the lighting. In many ancient texts, including the Dead Sea Scrolls and ancient Mesopotamian descriptions of the gods, the heavenly beings were always described as having glowing, incredibly bright, light-colored eyes that intimidated regular humans. Beyond their physical bodies, Rh negative individuals often report sharing very specific psychological and mental traits. They frequently score higher on IQ tests, possessing deeply analytical minds. But they also have an extremely heightened sense of intuition. Many claim to have vivid prophetic dreams a deep sense of empathy for others, and an unexplainable feeling that they simply do not belong here. They often describe a lifelong, lingering sensation of homesickness for a place they cannot identify, almost as if their genetic memory is subtly longing for the stars. It is also incredibly fascinating to look at where this blood type is concentrated geographically. The highest concentration of Rh-negative blood in the entire world is found among a very mysterious group of people called the Basques, who live in the Pyrenees Mountains between Spain and France. The Basque people are a massive puzzle to historians and linguists. Their language, Euskara, is completely isolated. It has absolutely zero connection to any other human language on the face of the earth. It does not share roots with Latin, Germanic, or Slavic tongues. It is a language seemingly dropped out of the sky, and up to 35% of the Basque people carry the rare Rh-negative blood type. Is it just a coincidence that an isolated tribe with an unearthly language also carries the highest percentage of the missing earthly blood protein? When you connect the dots, the sudden genetic fusion of our chromosomes, the violently unnatural immune system, rejection in pregnant mothers, and the bizarre, unearthly physical traits of the Rh-negative population, the story of Darwinian evolution begins to look very fragile. We are carrying biological secrets inside our veins that modern science cannot comfortably explain. But the Anunnaki did not just leave their fingerprints inside our microscopic DNA. If you know where to look, you can find massive, undeniable physical evidence of their presence buried in the dirt and carved into the stone all across our planet. And as we leave the microscopic world of blood and genetics, we are going to look at the undeniable physical remains they left behind. We are going to look at the giants who once walked the earth and the bizarre elongated skulls of the ancient elite who tried desperately to look just like the gods who created them. We have just spent a lot of time looking at the invisible, microscopic world. We explored the bizarre fusion of human chromosomes and the unnatural mystery of Rh-negative blood. But what if you are the kind of person who needs to see something with your own two eyes to believe it? What if you want physical, touchable proof? If the Anunnaki were real, flesh and blood beings who came to Earth, and if they really did interbreed with early humans to create a hybrid bloodline, then where are the bodies, where are the bones? To answer that, we have to pull our focus out of the biology lab and head out into the dirt. So we need to look at the physical fossils and skeletal remains scattered across the globe. And when we do, we find two massive, undeniable physical anomalies that mainstream history desperately tries to sweep under the rug: the elongated skulls and the global footprint of the giants. Let us start with the heads. All over the world, anthropologists have discovered an incredibly bizarre ancient practice known as artificial cranial deformation, or simply head binding. Imagine you are an ancient human living thousands of years ago. You belong to a primitive tribe. Suddenly, you and your people decide that the ultimate standard of beauty, power, and royalty is to have a head that is stretched backward like a massive, elongated watermelon. So, how do you achieve this? The process was brutal. A few days after a baby was born, while its skull bones were still incredibly soft and flexible, the parents would take two heavy, flat wooden boards. They would place one board on the baby's forehead, one on the back of the head, and tightly wrap them together with heavy cloth or rope. As the baby grew over the next few years, the skull could not expand naturally upward and outward. Instead, it was forced to grow backward, creating a massive, elongated cone shape. This practice has been found all over the world. Archaeologists have dug up these bound skulls in South America, in Central America, in Europe among the ancient Huns, in Africa, and in the Middle East. Now, logically, we have to stop and ask a very simple question. Why? Why would completely isolated cultures separated by vast, uncrossable oceans and thousands of miles of rugged mountains, who had absolutely zero contact with one another, all suddenly decide to torture their infants in the exact same bizarre way? Human beings do not just randomly invent something this specific and unnatural in a vacuum. We imitate. Imitation is the most basic human instinct. So, who were these ancient people imitating? If you ask the ancient tribes themselves, their oral traditions give a very clear answer. They say they were trying to make their children look like the gods. If the ancient rulers, the Anunnaki, naturally possessed massive, elongated heads, then the human elite would do absolutely anything to look like them. Looking like the gods meant you had a divine right to rule. It meant you were special. Mainstream science looks at all elongated skulls and simply dismisses them all as the result of human head binding. But that explanation completely falls apart when we look at the dry, desert coast of Peru. In 1928, a brilliant Peruvian archaeologist named Julio Tello was excavating a massive, ancient graveyard on the Paracas Peninsula. What he found buried under the sand completely shattered the biological rules of human anatomy. Tello discovered hundreds of massive, elongated skulls. They are now famously known as the Paracas skulls. At first glance, you might think, okay, this is just more extreme head binding. But when medical doctors and physical anthropologists actually measured these skulls, they found something impossible. Here is a very simple rule of biology. You can change the shape of a skull by binding it with wood and rope, but you cannot change the actual volume or the weight of the bone material. Think of a piece of clay. If you have a ball of clay that weighs 1 pound and you roll it out into a long tube, it is still exactly 1 pound of clay. You changed the shape, but you did not change the volume. If a normal human skull has a certain brain capacity, binding it will just shift the brain matter around. It will not magically give you a bigger brain. But the Paracas skulls are up to 25% larger in total volume than a normal human skull, and they are up to 60% heavier. This means there is simply more physical bone material and vastly more brain space than a normal human being possesses. No amount of tying boards to a baby's head can magically create extra bone mass or increase the internal volume of the brain cavity by 25%. It is biologically impossible, and the anatomical impossibilities do not stop there. If you run your hand over the top of your own head right now, you cannot feel it, but there is a zigzagging line running down the middle of your skull. It is called the sagittal suture. When you are a baby, your skull is made of different bone plates that eventually fuse together like a zipper as you grow. Every single normal human being on Earth has this zipper line. Paracas skulls do not. Their skulls are solid domes. They are completely missing the human sagittal suture. Furthermore, the two tiny holes in the back of the skull where the nerve endings pass through, called the parietal foramina, are in the completely wrong location compared to a normal human. And the jawbones are massive, thick, and incredibly robust. These are not artificially deformed human heads. These are genetically, biologically different heads. They belonged to a humanoid species, but they were absolutely not Homo sapiens. When independent researchers finally managed to get DNA samples from the hair and bone marrow of these Paracas skulls a few years ago, the results were highly controversial but incredibly fascinating. The mitochondrial DNA, which is the DNA passed down strictly from the mother, showed mutations that do not match any known human, primate, or animal tree on planet Earth. They were an entirely different branch of the humanoid family. Now let us jump halfway across the world, crossing the Atlantic Ocean and landing in the blazing sands of ancient Egypt. If we look at the 18th dynasty of Egypt, we find one of the most mysterious and bizarre families in human history, the family of Pharaoh Akhenaten. Akhenaten was considered the heretic king. When he took the throne, he completely upended thousands of years of Egyptian tradition. He fired all the priests, shut down the temples of the old gods, and declared that there was only one true god, the Aten, represented by a flying sun disk in the sky. But what is truly shocking about Akhenaten is not just his religion, it is his physical appearance. For centuries, Egyptian art was highly stylized and perfectly proportioned. Pharaohs were always depicted as muscular, perfect, and heroic. But Akhenaten ordered his sculptors to carve him exactly as he looked in real life. And the statues are horrifyingly strange. Akhenaten is shown with a massive, elongated, cone-shaped head. He has a strangely long neck, narrow shoulders, a protruding potbelly, incredibly wide feminine hips, and long, spindly, spider-like fingers. His wife, the famous and beautiful Queen Nefertiti, is always shown wearing a massive, tall, blue crown. Have you ever wondered what she was hiding under that giant hat? In the rare carvings where she is shown without the crown, her head is just as massively elongated as her husband's, and their children, the princesses of Egypt, were literally carved and painted as having gigantic, backward-sloping heads that look identical to the Paracas skulls found thousands of miles away in Peru. Mainstream historians try to explain this away by saying Akhenaten suffered from a rare genetic disease like Marfan syndrome, but Marfan syndrome makes you weak and sterile. Akhenaten had massive amounts of energy, built an entire new capital city from scratch in the middle of the desert, and fathered at least 6 children. This was not a disease, this was genetics. Was the royal bloodline of the Egyptian pharaohs directly linked to the elongated skulls of the Anunnaki? Were they the direct, hybrid descendants of the gods ruling over the normal human population? But the elongated skulls are only one half of the fossil mystery. We have to talk about the bodies. We have to talk about the giants. If you read the ancient Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki are never described as being the same size as humans. They were massive. They are often depicted in ancient carvings holding full-grown lions under their arms like little house cats. If these massive beings came to Earth and, as the texts suggest, eventually began to interbreed with human women, what kind of offspring would be born? You do not have to look far to find the answer. It is written plainly in one of the most widely read books in human history, the Bible. In the book of Genesis, chapter 6, there is a very brief, incredibly strange passage that most Sunday school teachers conveniently skip over. It says, "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown." The Hebrew word used in the original text for these giants is Nephilim. The direct translation of Nephilim is those who came down, or the fallen ones. It is the exact same translation as the Sumerian word Anunnaki. The Bible is literally telling us the exact same story as the Sumerian clay tablets, just using different names. The sons of God, the Anunnaki astronauts, came down, mated with human women, and produced a hybrid race of massive, towering giants. And this is not just a Middle Eastern story. If you travel across the globe to North America and sit down with the elders of the Native American tribes, they will tell you the exact same history. The Paiute Indians, who have lived in the Nevada desert for thousands of years, have a deeply ingrained oral tradition about a race of massive, cannibalistic, red-haired giants they called the Siteka. According to the Paiute legend, these giants were not native to America. They arrived on boats across the ocean. They were incredibly tall, vastly strong, and extremely violent. The Paiute say they fought a massive, generations-long war against these giants. Finally, the native tribes banded together, cornered the last remaining giants inside a deep cave, filled the entrance with dry brush, and set it on fire, wiping them out forever. For centuries, modern historians laughed at this Native American story. They called it a cute campfire myth, that is, until the year 1911. Two miners were digging for bat guano inside a massive, dark cave in Nevada called Lovelock Cave, the exact location of the Paiute legend. As they dug through the centuries of dirt, they started hitting bones. Not normal bones, massive bones. They unearthed human-like skeletons that measured up to 8 feet tall. They found giant skulls with thick jawbones, perfectly intact, with strange reddish hair still attached to the scalps. They even found pairs of woven sandals left behind in the dust. The sandals were a staggering 15 inches long, equivalent to a modern US men's shoe size of 29. These were not normal human beings. And Lovelock Cave is not an isolated incident. Throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s, hundreds of newspaper articles from highly respected publications like the New York Times reported on the discovery of massive, giant skeletons being dug up all across the Ohio River Valley, inside the massive dirt mounds of the Midwest and in the deserts of the Southwest. Often these skeletons were described as having double rows of teeth and 6 fingers on each hand, traits directly associated with the Nephilim in ancient texts. So, what happened to all these giant bones? Why aren't they on display in the Smithsonian Museum today? Well, according to countless reports from the people who originally found them, agents from the Smithsonian Institution would quickly arrive at the excavation sites, pack the massive bones into wooden crates, load them onto trains and ship them away. And then they completely vanished. They were never seen again. Why would the establishment want to hide giant skeletons and elongated skulls? Because acknowledging them would completely destroy the carefully constructed, slow-moving timeline of Darwinian evolution. It would force humanity to admit that we are a species with amnesia. It would prove that the ancient myths of gods, monsters, and giant hybrids were not works of fiction, but accurate historical records. These hybrid descendants, these giants and big-headed rulers, possessed incredible physical strength and vast inherited knowledge from their Anunnaki creators. And what did they do with that knowledge? They built things. They built structures so massive, so incredibly heavy, and so mathematically perfect that even with all our modern cranes, lasers, and computer technology, we absolutely cannot replicate them today. As we move on, we are going to look at the impossible architecture scattered across the earth and ask how primitive farmers managed to slice through granite like a hot knife through butter. So far, we have looked at the hidden codes inside our DNA and the massive, bizarre skeletons buried in the dirt. But the Anunnaki and their hybrid descendants did not just leave biological footprints, they left massive, undeniable fingerprints all over the surface of the earth. If you truly want to understand the vast gap between what mainstream history teaches us and what actually happened in our ancient past, you only need to look at the stones. According to traditional history books, human civilization is a straight, upward-sloping line. We went from living in caves to discovering farming to building small, mud brick villages, and eventually, over thousands of years, we learned how to build grand cities. That is the story we are all told. But when we actually travel the globe and look at the oldest structures on Earth, that story completely falls apart. We find impossible architecture. We find monuments constructed with a level of mathematical precision, astronomical knowledge, and sheer physical power that we cannot even replicate today with modern diesel cranes and diamond-tipped power tools. Let us start with the most famous, the most studied, and yet the most misunderstood building in human history, the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. If you ask a mainstream Egyptologist how the Great Pyramid was built, they will give you a very standard, slightly boring answer. They will tell you that around 4,500 years ago, tens of thousands of Egyptian peasant farmers used ropes, wooden sleds, and raw human muscle to drag massive blocks of stone across the desert to build a giant tomb for a pharaoh named Khufu. They will tell you that to cut these massive stones, they used primitive copper chisels and stone hammers. But when you actually apply basic logic and modern engineering to that story, it becomes an absolute joke. First, let us talk about the sheer scale of this building. The Great Pyramid is not just a pile of rocks, it is made up of an estimated 2.3 million individual blocks of stone. The average block weighs roughly 2.5 tons, about the weight of a large modern SUV. But many of the blocks, especially the massive granite beams used deep inside the king's chamber, weigh up to 80 tons. That is the equivalent of a massive commercial airplane or a herd of large elephants. And these 80-ton granite beams were not quarried next door. They were dragged from a quarry in Aswan, which is over 500 miles away from the building site. Now, let us look at the timeline. Mainstream history claims the entire pyramid was built in just 20 years, during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu. If you do the basic math on that, it is mind-boggling. To place 2. 3 million blocks in 20 years, working 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, the builders would have to perfectly cut, transport, lift, and set one massive stone block perfectly into place every 5 minutes, day and night, without a single pause for 2 decades straight, using nothing but wooden rollers, hemp ropes, and copper tools. Let us talk about those copper tools. Have you ever held a piece of pure copper? It is an incredibly soft metal. You can literally bend a thin piece of copper with your bare hands. Now go to your kitchen and look at a granite countertop. Granite is one of the hardest igneous rocks on planet Earth. Trying to cut through 80 tons of solid granite using a soft copper chisel is like trying to cut down a massive, ancient oak tree using a plastic butter knife. It is physically impossible. The chisel would instantly bend and become utterly useless after a single strike. Yet when we look at the stones of the Great Pyramid, We do not see the messy, chaotic marks of primitive slaves blindly bashing rocks together. We see laser-like precision. The casing stones that once covered the outside of the pyramid were cut so perfectly flat and fitted together so tightly that even today, thousands of years later, you cannot slide a single piece of paper or a razor blade between the cracks. There is no mortar holding them together. It is just pure, perfect geometry. And then there is the astronomical knowledge encoded into the building. The Great Pyramid is not just pointing generally north. It is aligned to true mathematical north with an incredibly terrifying margin of error of just 3/60 of a single degree. It is the most accurately aligned building in existence. Our modern skyscrapers are not even aligned that perfectly. How did primitive people in loincloths find true north with microscopic accuracy without a modern compass or satellite GPS? Furthermore, if you look at the three main pyramids of the Giza Plateau from above, they are not laid out in a straight line. They are slightly offset. For years, historians thought this was just a mistake. But in the 1990s, an independent researcher noticed something profound. The layout of the three pyramids perfectly, flawlessly matches the alignment of the three stars in the constellation of Orion's belt. Why Orion? If we go back to the ancient Egyptian and Sumerian texts, the constellation of Orion was constantly associated with the gods of the sky, the place where the lords of heaven originated. The Great Pyramid was not a tomb. In fact, no mummy has ever been found inside the Great Pyramid, ever. It was a massive, highly advanced machine, an astronomical marker, a beacon built with knowledge that was simply handed down from a vastly superior civilization. The human slaves may have provided the sweat, but the Anunnaki, the architects of heaven, provided the blueprints. But if you think the Great Pyramid shatters the historical timeline, we need to travel a bit further north to a dusty ridge in modern-day Turkey. We need to talk about Gobekli Tepe. If the Great Pyramid is the ultimate engineering mystery, Gobekli Tepe is the ultimate time machine that completely breaks every single rule we were ever taught in school. For the longest time, historians agreed that human civilization really kicked off around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago in Sumeria. Before that, they said, humans were absolutely primitive. We were simple hunter-gatherers living in caves, terrified of the dark, and incapable of organizing large groups to build anything bigger than a campfire. Then in the mid-1990s, a local Kurdish farmer in Turkey was ploughing his field when his tractor hit a massive, strange, rectangular stone buried in the dirt. He called in the authorities, and a brilliant German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt arrived to investigate. When Schmidt and his team started digging, they did not just find a few old stones. They unearthed an absolutely massive, sprawling temple complex made up of giant, circular stone rings. But these were not just rough, unshaped boulders like Stonehenge. The rings were made of massive, perfectly carved, T-shaped limestone pillars. Some of these pillars are almost 20 feet tall and weigh over 20 tons. And they are not blank. They are covered in spectacular, highly detailed, three-dimensional carvings of fierce animals, lions, scorpions, spiders, vultures, and wild boars. Let me explain why three-dimensional relief carving is so important. If you want to draw a picture of a lion on a rock, you simply take a sharp stone and scratch lines into the surface. That is easy. But to create a 3D relief, you have to carve away the entire background of the massive stone pillar, leaving only the animal popping out. It requires immense artistic skill, perfect planning, and thousands of hours of incredibly delicate labor. But here is the part that made the global archaeological community completely lose their minds. When they ran carbon dating tests on the organic material found around these massive pillars, the results came back showing that Gobekli Tepe was built around 9,600 BC. That is roughly 11,600 years ago. To put that in perspective, if the Great Pyramid was built 4,500 years ago, that means Gobekli Tepe is older to the ancient Egyptians than the ancient Egyptians are to us today. It sits at the very end of the last ice age. This completely destroys the traditional timeline of human history. According to every textbook in the world, 11,600 years ago, humans had not even invented the wheel. They had not invented pottery. They had not discovered agriculture. They were supposed to be primitive cavemen chasing mammoths with pointy sticks. So how does a random group of primitive, starving hunter-gatherers suddenly wake up one morning, organize a labor force of hundreds of people, quarry 20-ton blocks of limestone, drag them up a massive hill, and carve beautiful 3D masterpieces without metal tools, writing, or mathematics? The simple answer is they didn't. You do not wake up one day and decide to build a massive, perfectly engineered temple complex out of nowhere. Gobekli Tepe is not the beginning of a slow, ascending civilization. It looks like the glorious remnant of a highly advanced civilization that was trying to rebuild after a massive global catastrophe. And the most bizarre mystery of Gobekli Tepe is how it ended. It was not destroyed by an earthquake. It was not abandoned because of a drought or an invading army. After using this magnificent temple complex for about 1,000 years, the builders did something incredibly strange, something that required almost as much effort as building it in the first place. They deliberately buried it. They brought in thousands and thousands of tons of dirt, gravel, and animal bones, and they completely backfilled the entire massive complex, sealing it perfectly under a massive artificial hill. They hid it. Why do you bury a massive sacred monument? You only bury something if you are trying to protect it. You bury something when you want to hide it from a catastrophic event, or perhaps hide it from an enemy. Were the human builders of Gobekli Tepe told to hide this advanced knowledge by their Anunnaki overseers? Were they preserving a time capsule for future generations to find long after the gods had retreated to the shadows? Gobekli Tepe proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that human history is not a slow climb from stupidity to intelligence. We were highly advanced thousands of years before we were supposed to be. But if you think moving 20-ton blocks at Gobekli Tepe or 80-ton blocks at the Great Pyramid is impossible, brace yourself. Because as we travel next to Lebanon and the high-altitude mountains of Bolivia, we are going to look at stones so unbelievably massive, weighing over 1,000 tons each, that modern engineers literally have no earthly idea how they were moved. We are going to look at the true, undeniable landing pads of the gods. We have just explored the mind-boggling precision of the Great Pyramid and the timeline-shattering age of Gobekli Tepe. But if you want to see the absolute limits of what we consider physically impossible, we have to look at the sheer, raw weight of the stones left behind by the ancients. We are going to examine blocks of solid rock, so impossibly massive that if you asked a modern construction company to move them today, they would literally laugh in your face and tell you it cannot be done. Let us travel to the modern-day country of Lebanon, to an ancient, sun-baked city called Baalbek. If you visit Baalbek today, your tour guide will proudly show you the magnificent ruins of the Temple of Jupiter built by the ancient Romans. And yes, the Roman columns are beautiful, but if you look closely, you will notice a glaring, massive architectural secret. The Romans did not build this site from scratch. They built their beautiful temple on top of a foundation that was already there. A foundation made of stone so unimaginably large that they make the 80-ton blocks of the Great Pyramid look like children's building blocks. At the very base of this ancient foundation, there is a massive retaining wall containing 3 specific blocks of limestone known as the trelithal. Each one of these 3 blocks weighs an estimated 800 tons. Let me put 800 tons into perspective so you can truly visualize this. A fully loaded Boeing 747 airplane weighs roughly 400 tons. That means a single stone block in this wall weighs as much as 2 massive commercial jumbo jets combined. Or, if you prefer, imagine a herd of about 150 fully grown African elephants squeezed together into one solid block of rock. Now imagine trying to lift that. Mainstream historians want you to believe that the ancient Romans, or perhaps an even older civilization using primitive hand tools, cut these blocks out of the bedrock, dragged them for miles, lifted them over 20 feet into the air, and placed them side by side with such absolute perfection that you cannot even slide a credit card between them. But it gets even crazier. If you walk about a mile away from the temple ruins, you will find the ancient limestone quarry where these megaliths were cut. Lying there in the dirt, half buried, is a massive, perfectly rectangular block of stone, famously called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. This single block is over 68 feet long and weighs an astonishing 1,000 tons. And right next to it, recently uncovered in 2014, is an even larger block weighing a staggering 1,650 tons. It is the largest single carved stone block ever discovered on planet Earth. According to traditional historians, the ancients carved these massive blocks by hand and simply planned to roll them to the temple site using wooden logs. But let us apply some basic, real-world physics to that story. If you place a 1,000-ton block of solid rock on top of a wooden log, the log does not roll. It instantly explodes into sawdust. The sheer gravitational pressure of 2 million pounds would instantly crush any wooden roller, hemp rope, or primitive sled into powder. Even today, in the 21st century, moving a 1,000-ton object requires a small army of specialized engineers, perfectly flat modern asphalt highways, and custom-built multi-million-dollar hydraulic machines with hundreds of wheels moving at a snail's pace. We struggle to do this on flat, paved ground. Yet, the ancients supposedly moved these blocks over rough, uneven, rocky hills without a single drop of diesel fuel. How did they do it? Mainstream archaeology simply shrugs and says they must have had a lot of strong men, but human muscle has a mathematical limit. You simply cannot attach enough men to a 1,000-ton rock to move it. The ropes would snap, the ground would give way, and the sheer logistics of getting tens of thousands of men to pull in perfect unison is physically impossible. But what do the local legends say? If you ask the local people who have lived in the shadow of Baalbek for thousands of years, their ancient stories completely ignore the Romans. They say the original foundation was not built by human hands at all. They claim the massive platform was constructed thousands of years before the Romans before the Great Flood by a race of giants. The legends state that Baalbek was built as a massive landing pad for the gods who came down from the heavens. When you look at the sheer, flat, incredibly heavy-duty nature of this megalithic platform, the idea of it being a launch pad or a landing site for advanced Anunnaki aerial vehicles suddenly makes a terrifying amount of sense. You don't build a 1,000-ton foundation for a simple stone temple. You build it because you need to support something incredibly heavy landing on top of it. Now, we are going to leave the Middle East and fly all the way across the globe to the high-altitude mountains of South America. We are going to a place that makes Baalbek look like a warm-up exercise. Welcome to Puma Punku, located in the harsh, freezing plains of Bolivia. Puma Punku sits at an elevation of nearly 13,000 feet above sea level. This is high up in the Andes Mountains. The air here is incredibly thin, making it hard to breathe, let alone do backbreaking manual labor. There are no trees here. That means no wood for rollers, no wood to build scaffolding, and no wood to burn for large fires. It is a barren, rocky, high-altitude desert. Yet scattered across this alien-looking landscape are the ruins of what looks like a shattered, highly advanced technological facility. The stones at Puma Punku are not limestone or sandstone. They are primarily made of two types of rock, red sandstone and andesite. To truly understand the mystery of Puma Punku, you need a very quick, incredibly simple lesson in rock hardness. Think about trying to scratch a diamond. You can't do it with a metal knife, right? You need another diamond. Andesite is an incredibly hard, dense, volcanic rock. It is so brutally hard that the only way to effectively cut it today is by using modern diamond-tipped power saws and high-speed industrial drills. Mainstream history insists that Puma Punku was built by an ancient tribe called the Tiwanaku around 1,500 years ago. And what tools did the Tiwanaku have? They had primitive stone hammers and soft copper chisels. Saying that an ancient tribe carved solid andesite with a soft copper chisel is like saying you carved a massive ice sculpture using a wet noodle. It is completely, totally, physically impossible. The copper would instantly bend and warp the second it struck the stone. But when we look at the stones of Puma Punku, we don't just see rough, chipped carvings. We see perfection that defies logic. We see the famous H blocks. These are massive blocks of solid rock carved into perfect H shapes. The cuts on these stones are so perfectly straight, so flawlessly flat, that they look exactly like they were sliced with a massive industrial laser cutter. If you take a modern metal square, a tool used by carpenters to ensure a perfect 90-degree right angle, and place it inside the corners of these ancient stones, it fits flawlessly. Perfect 90-degree internal angles. Achieving a perfect right angle on the inside of a solid block of hard, volcanic rock is notoriously difficult even for modern machinists. Doing it with a piece of copper and a rock is a fantasy, and the impossible precision does not stop at the flat surfaces. The stones at Puma Punku are covered in tiny, perfectly drilled holes. These are not messy, hand-drilled holes that wobble and vary in width. They are perfectly uniform, going straight down into the hard stone at exactly the same depth. Some of the stones feature deep, perfectly straight grooves cut directly into the rock. Inside these grooves are tiny, evenly spaced holes. Modern engineers who have visited the site say these grooves look exactly like the tracks used for sliding metal panels or hiding advanced wiring. How were these massive stones held together? They did not use muddy mortar like primitive builders. Instead, they carved highly complex interlocking shapes into the stones, exactly like a massive multi-ton set of Lego bricks. The stones fit into one another so perfectly that the massive earthquakes that frequently rock the Andes Mountains could not rattle them apart. Furthermore, the builders carved deep, eye-shaped indentations across the joints of the stones. They would then pour molten metal into these indentations. When the metal cooled and hardened, it acted as a massive, unbreakable metal staple, locking the giant stones together forever. This is a highly advanced construction technique used in modern architecture. Yet we are told it was invented by primitive farmers freezing in the thin mountain air, who supposedly did not even have a written language. When you look at the entire site of Puma Punku today, it does not look like a city that slowly decayed over time. The massive stones are completely shattered and tossed around like children's toys. Some of the blocks weighing hundreds of tons are flipped upside down or thrown hundreds of feet away. It looks exactly as if the entire facility was blown apart by a massive, catastrophic explosion. Was this an ancient Anunnaki processing plant or a high-tech facility that was deliberately destroyed? When we step back and look at the sheer weight of Baalbek and the laser-like precision of Puma Punku, the story of primitive human slaves working with copper chisels completely falls to pieces. These sites were not built by us. They were built by a civilization that possessed technology that was in many ways superior to what we have today. They possessed the ability to manipulate gravity, slice through the hardest rocks like butter, and organize global logistical operations. But the Anunnaki did not just leave behind massive, impossible buildings. They left behind images of themselves. And as we will discover next, the most terrifying piece of evidence is not the buildings themselves, but the fact that the exact same faces, the exact same flying serpents, and the exact same bizarre technology were carved into the walls by ancient people all over the world, from the jungles of Mexico to the deserts of Iraq. Cultures that supposedly never met were all worshipping the exact same globally connected gods. We have looked at the microscopic anomalies in our DNA, the massive bones hidden by history, and the impossible multi-ton stones scattered across the globe. But there is one piece of the puzzle that is perhaps the most difficult for mainstream historians to explain away. It is not something hidden in a genetics lab or buried deep underground. It is carved right into the walls, painted on the ancient pottery, and woven into the oldest stories ever told by humanity. It is the undeniable global footprint of the exact same gods. Let us do a simple thought experiment. Imagine you have two groups of children. You put one group in a locked room in New York, and you put the other group in a locked room in Tokyo. You give them both crayons and paper, and you tell them to draw a monster. Because these children have completely different backgrounds, different languages, and have never spoken to each other, you are going to get two completely different drawings. One might draw a furry beast, the other might draw a giant bug. That is how human imagination works in isolation. According to traditional history, the ancient world was exactly like those locked rooms. For thousands of years, the great oceans acted as massive, uncrossable walls. The ancient people of Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, had absolutely zero contact with the ancient people of Mesoamerica, modern-day Mexico. The people of ancient China had no idea the people of ancient Peru even existed. They were completely, totally isolated. Therefore, according to basic logic, their religions, their myths, and their artwork should be completely different. Their gods should look entirely unique to their specific environments. But when we actually look at the archaeological record, that is not what we find. We find the exact opposite. We find the exact same children in different locked rooms, drawing the exact same hyper-detailed monster. Let us start with one of the most universal and bizarre symbols in all of human history, the flying serpent, or the dragon. If you travel to the dense, humid jungles of Central America, you will find the magnificent ruins of the Maya and the Aztecs. At the very center of their religion was a powerful, supreme creator god named Quetzalcoatl. His name literally translates to the feathered serpent. According to their ancient legends, Quetzalcoatl was not a magical spirit. He was described as a tall, pale-skinned, bearded figure who arrived from across the sea. He brought the ancient Mesoamericans the gifts of civilization. He taught them mathematics, astronomy, how to grow corn, and how to build massive step pyramids. When his work was done, he supposedly left on a flying ship or a serpent of fire, promising to return one day. Now let us cross the Pacific Ocean and land in ancient China. At the very foundation of Chinese mythology, who are the bringers of wisdom, weather, and civilization? The mighty dragons. But these are not the mindless, fire-breathing beasts of European fairy tales. In Asian cultures, dragons are highly intelligent, divine beings associated with the sky, water, and royal bloodlines. In fact, the ancient Chinese emperors believed they were the direct, literal descendants of these celestial dragons. The emperors were considered the sons of heaven, holding a divine right to rule because of their reptilian or serpent-like ancestry. Now let us jump over to the deserts of ancient Egypt. Look at the golden death mask of Pharaoh King Tutankhamun. What is sitting right there, dead center on his forehead, guarding his mind? A cobra, a serpent. The Egyptians called it the uraeus, a symbol of supreme divine authority and royalty, explicitly connecting the pharaoh to the gods of the sky. Finally, let us go back to the source, to the ancient Sumerian clay tablets in Mesopotamia. In the Anunnaki pantheon, the brilliant chief scientist who genetically engineered humanity, the one who spliced our DNA, was named Enki. And what was Enki's primary symbol? You guessed it, a serpent. He was often depicted as a snake entwined around a tree or a staff. Does that imagery sound familiar? It is the exact same symbol of the serpent wrapped around a pole that the modern medical establishment uses today, the rod of Asclepius. It is a 6,000-year-old symbol of genetic manipulation and healing passed down directly from the Anunnaki. How is this possible? How do isolated cultures in Mexico, China, Egypt, and Iraq, separated by tens of thousands of miles and thousands of years, all independently decide that their supreme creators, the bringers of advanced knowledge and civilization, were associated with flying snakes and reptilian imagery? Mainstream historians will tell you it is just a universal human archetype. They claim that all ancient people were simply afraid of snakes, so they naturally turned them into gods. But that is a massive, lazy cop-out. You do not build massive, geometrically perfect pyramids aligned to the stars just because you are scared of a garden snake. The global presence of the feathered serpent or sky dragon is not a coincidence. It is a historical record. It is the primitive human mind trying to describe a highly advanced, perhaps reptilian-looking extraterrestrial race that operated globally. The Anunnaki were not just localized to the Middle East, they were managing the entire planet. But if the global serpent imagery isn't enough to convince you, there is another piece of evidence. It is a highly specific, bizarre physical object carved into stone all over the world. It is the ultimate smoking gun of global Anunnaki presence. Independent researchers call it the handbag of the gods. Let us go back to ancient Sumeria. When the Sumerians carved giant stone reliefs of the Anunnaki gods, they always depicted them holding very specific items. In one hand, the Anunnaki figure is usually holding a pine cone-shaped object, pointing it toward the tree of life. But it is what they are holding in their other hand that is truly baffling. Carved with absolute precision, dangling from the hand of the Anunnaki, is a square or rectangular object with a semicircular handle on top. It looks exactly 100% like a modern-day handbag or a piece of sophisticated carrying luggage. Now look at these carvings. These are not simple, primitive scratches. These are highly detailed, official portraits of their supreme rulers. If you are carving a portrait of an all-powerful space god, why on earth would you make sure to carve him carrying a purse? What is inside that bag that is so incredibly important that it had to be memorialized in solid rock for thousands of years? Before we try to answer what is inside it, let us trace where else this exact same handbag shows up. Because it did not stay in the Middle East. Travel thousands of miles away to the ancient ruins of La Venta in Mexico. Here, the Olmec civilization, the mother culture of Mesoamerica, existing long before the Maya or Aztecs, carved massive, mysterious stone monuments. On one specific monument, Monument 19, we see a figure sitting inside the coils of a giant feathered serpent. And what is that figure holding perfectly in his hand? The exact same square handbag with a semicircular handle. Travel across the ocean to the remote, dense jungles of Indonesia. On the mysterious megalithic statues of the Bada Valley, what do we find carved into the sides of these ancient giant stone figures? The exact same handbag. And the final, most mind-bending piece of the puzzle takes us right back to the time-shattering ruins of Gobekli Tepe in Turkey, the massive temple complex built 11,600 years ago, thousands of years before the Sumerians or the Olmecs were even supposed to exist. On Pillar 43, standing near the very top of the massive T-shaped stone, carved in perfect 3D relief, are three distinct, perfectly shaped handbags sitting in a row. This completely destroys the mainstream narrative of isolated human development. You have the exact same highly specific, incredibly bizarre technological object carved into stone in Iraq, Mexico, Indonesia, and Turkey, spanning over 6,000 years of supposed unconnected history. It is the ancient equivalent of finding an iPhone carved into a wall in ancient Rome and then finding the exact same iPhone carved into a wall in an uncontacted Amazonian tribe. It is absolute proof of a globally connected, highly advanced presence. So, what is the handbag? What were the Anunnaki carrying around the world? If we look back at the Sumerian texts, remember Enki, the chief scientist. Remember the House of Life, where he genetically engineered the human worker race. To alter DNA, you cannot just use mud and magic words. You need highly advanced biological technology. You need containers to hold genetic samples, vials of earthly DNA, and Anunnaki blood. Many independent researchers and ancient astronaut theorists believe that the handbag is not a piece of luggage holding extra clothes. It is a piece of advanced Anunnaki technology. It was likely a portable gene splicing kit, a biological container used to collect, store, and transport the genetic material needed to populate the planet. The pine cone they hold in the other hand is often interpreted as a symbol of the pineal gland in the human brain, or a device used to administer genetic upgrades. When ancient primitive humans saw these giant, advanced beings arriving from the sky in fiery ships, walking out holding these strange, powerful devices that could create life or bring destruction, they didn't know the words gene splicing container or biological hard drive. They simply carved exactly what they saw, a square box with a handle. The global presence of the feathered serpent and the Anunnaki handbag proves that human civilization was not an isolated accident. We were a global project. The Earth was a massive interconnected laboratory managed by the exact same group of advanced beings. But this raises a terrifying question. If the Anunnaki were here managing a global mining operation and genetically engineering a slave race, where did they go? Did they pack up their handbags, board their ships, and simply fly back to Nibiru when the gold ran out? Or did they realize that Earth, with its perfect atmosphere, its abundant resources, and its highly useful, easily manipulated human workforce, was too valuable to abandon? As we will explore in the next section, the Anunnaki never truly left. They simply changed tactics. They stopped ruling us openly from giant stone temples, and instead they retreated behind the curtain. They left their hybrid, big-headed, blue-blooded descendants in charge. We are going to look at the elite bloodlines that have ruled humanity for centuries, the secret societies that guard the ancient knowledge, and the undeniable symbols of the Anunnaki that are still printed on the very money in your wallet today. So far, we have been looking deep into the past. We have dug through ancient dirt, measured impossibly heavy stones, and read translations of 6,000-year-old clay tablets. But now we need to bring this story into the present day, because if the Anunnaki truly were here, if they genetically engineered us, and if they built a global infrastructure, the biggest question is not where did they come from? The biggest question is, where did they go? To answer that, we have to look at how the world is run right now, today. We have to look at the people holding the levers of power, the royalty, the mega bankers, the politicians, and the secret societies that seem to operate completely above the laws of normal human beings. Let us start with a very common everyday phrase that you have probably heard 1,000 times: blue blood. When we talk about the kings, queens, and elite nobility of Europe, we call them blue bloods. Mainstream history will tell you that this phrase started in medieval Spain. They claim the Spanish aristocrats had such pale, untanned skin because they never had to work outside in the sun like the peasant farmers, that you could easily see the blue veins pulsing under their arms. But if you look at the ancient texts, and if you understand the biological anomalies we discussed earlier, that explanation feels incredibly shallow. Remember the Rh negative blood type? The missing monkey protein? Remember how people with this rare blood type often have pale skin, high intelligence, and lower body temperatures? The Anunnaki were not from Earth. If they bled, their blood would not look or function exactly like ours. Some independent researchers suggest that the term blue blood isn't just a metaphor for pale skin. It is a literal, ancient memory of a bloodline that was fundamentally, genetically different from the red-blooded, earthly, human worker class. It is the bloodline of the gods, and how do you keep a specific, alien bloodline pure over thousands of years? You absolutely cannot mix it with the general population. If you dilute the Anunnaki genetics with too much normal, earthly DNA, you lose the advanced traits, the heightened intelligence, the psychic intuition, the longevity, and the divine right to rule. This explains one of the darkest, most bizarre, and most consistent obsessions of royal families throughout all of human history: extreme incest. If you look at the ancient Egyptian pharaohs, the supposedly divine rulers with the elongated skulls like Akhenaten, they didn't marry outside their family. They married their sisters, their half-sisters, and sometimes even their own daughters. If you look at the royal families of Europe, the Habsburgs, the Romanovs, the British monarchy, for centuries, they refused to marry commoners. They only married their first cousins or close relatives from other royal houses. Biologically speaking, extreme inbreeding is a terrible idea for normal humans. It causes horrible genetic diseases, deformities, and madness. The European royals suffered heavily from this. The famous Habsburg jaw was a severe facial deformity caused by generations of incest, and the Russian royal family was plagued by hemophilia, a deadly blood-clotting disorder. So why did they keep doing it? They weren't stupid. They had access to the best doctors and scholars of their time. They knew inbreeding caused physical problems, but they did it anyway because preserving the purity of the bloodline, protecting whatever ancient Anunnaki genetic markers gave them their right to rule, was considered vastly more important than having physically healthy children. They were desperately trying to hold on to the fading genetics of the gods who put them in charge. The Sumerian tablets clearly state that before the Anunnaki, specifically the leader, Enlil, decided to retreat from the day-to-day management of Earth, they didn't just leave a vacuum of power. They appointed human kings to rule in their place. But these weren't just random, capable humans. They were the hybrid offspring of the Anunnaki and human women. They were the demigods, the Nephilim, the ones carrying the divine DNA. The Anunnaki handed these hybrid kings the tools of civilization, the knowledge of mathematics, architecture, advanced agriculture, and most importantly, the secret knowledge of how to control the human masses. Fast forward to today, we no longer have god kings openly demanding sacrifices from massive stone pyramids. We live in a modern democratic world, right? We elect our leaders. We have free markets. But if you peel back the very thin layer of modern society, you find a structure that looks suspiciously exactly like the ancient world. You find a tiny, incredibly wealthy, ultra-powerful fraction of a percent of the population that controls almost all the money, all the media, all the natural resources, and ultimately all the governments. Many conspiracy theorists and alternative researchers believe that this modern elite, the massive banking dynasties, the shadowy corporate board members, the leaders of secret societies like the Illuminati or the Freemasons, are the direct, unbroken descendants of those original hybrid kings. They are the modern-day managers left in charge of the Anunnaki's global plantation. And how do they control us? They don't need to use whips or giant stone temples anymore. They use something much more effective: money and debt. If the Anunnaki originally came to Earth to mine gold, it is incredibly fascinating that for thousands of years, the ultimate measure of human wealth and power has been gold. Why do we value this soft yellow metal so much? You can't eat it. It doesn't keep you warm. Before modern electronics, it had very few practical, everyday uses, yet human beings have slaughtered each other by the millions, enslaved entire continents, and destroyed empires just to hoard it. Did we naturally decide gold was valuable, or were we genetically programmed by our Anunnaki creators to obsessively dig it out of the ground for them? Today, the elite control the global financial system. They control the central banks that print the money. By controlling the debt, they control the labor of the entire human race. We wake up, we go to work, we pay our taxes, and we struggle to pay off our mortgages, effectively functioning as a highly efficient, self-managing global worker class. We are still mining the gold. We just do it in office cubicles instead of dark caves in Africa. But the most undeniable proof that the ancient Anunnaki influence is still actively shaping our modern world is found in the symbols they left behind. These ancient symbols are not dead history. The elite proudly display them right in our faces on the buildings of our most powerful institutions and on the very money we use every single day. Let us take out a standard American $1 bill. It is the most widely circulated, powerful piece of paper on the planet. Turn it over and look at the back. What is sitting right there, taking up almost a third of the bill? It is a pyramid, a massive stone pyramid. Why would the founding fathers of a new democratic nation in North America choose an ancient Egyptian tomb as their ultimate symbol of power? But look closer at the pyramid. The top is cut off. It is unfinished. Hovering above the flat top of the pyramid is a glowing, floating triangle containing a single, open, all-seeing eye. In ancient Egyptian mythology, this is the eye of Horus, or the eye of Ra. In the older Sumerian texts, the all-seeing eye was the symbol of Enlil, the strict Anunnaki commander who watched over everything the human slaves did. Underneath the pyramid are the Latin words Novus Ordo Seclorum. Translated, this means a new order of the ages, or, more commonly, the New World Order. Are we supposed to believe that it is just a fun, artistic coincidence that the most powerful financial currency on Earth features a massive, ancient Anunnaki structure topped with the glowing eye of the alien overlord hovering above a declaration of a new world order? And the symbols go far beyond the dollar bill. If you walk through the capital cities of the world, Washington, D.C., London, Paris, Rome, you will see ancient Egyptian and Sumerian architecture everywhere. Look at the Washington Monument. It is a massive, towering stone obelisk standing directly in front of the center of American political power. Obelisks were ancient Egyptian energy conductors and phallic symbols representing the power of the gods connecting heaven to earth. Why is the tallest stone structure in the world's most powerful capital an exact replica of an ancient Anunnaki monument? Look at the Vatican in Rome, the absolute center of the Catholic religion. Sitting right in the middle of St. Peter's Square is a massive, authentic, ancient Egyptian obelisk originally brought over by a Roman emperor. Why would the center of Christianity display a pagan monument dedicated to the ancient sun gods right in its front yard? And if you look at the Pope himself, look at the traditional hat he wears during grand ceremonies. It is a tall, pointed, two-pronged hat called a mitre. If you look at ancient Sumerian carvings of the Anunnaki god Dagon, the fish god who brought knowledge from the sea, he is depicted wearing a massive fish head helmet with an open mouth pointing upward. The modern papal mitre is almost an exact direct copy of the ancient Anunnaki fish god helmet. The elite of this world, the politicians, the bankers, the religious leaders, are not hiding their allegiance. They are displaying the ancient symbols of their Anunnaki ancestors in plain sight, knowing that the massive, busy, distracted human worker class will never stop to look up and understand what they are seeing. They are telling us, through their architecture, their money and their bloodlines, that the old gods never really died. The management simply put on modern suits, moved into corporate boardrooms, and continued to run the planet exactly as they were instructed thousands of years ago. But if the descendants are here running the show, what about the original Anunnaki? What about the giant, long-lived astronauts who originally came from Nibiru? Did they all leave? As we move into the final chapters of this investigation, we are going to look at the skies, and we are going to look deep beneath our oceans. Because if the recent highly classified military reports are true, the original masters of this planet did not leave, they just relocated. We are going to explore the terrifying connection between the ancient Anunnaki and the modern UFO phenomenon, and the strange, non-human entities that governments are desperately trying to keep quiet today. We have traced the fingerprints of the Anunnaki through our DNA across the massive stone monuments of the ancient world and into the boardrooms and royal palaces of the modern elite. We have established that the management of this planet was handed over to a hybrid, blue-blooded ruling class. But a massive, lingering question remains. What happened to the original Anunnaki? What happened to the giant flesh and blood beings who originally arrived in their fiery ships? Did they simply pack up their gold, board their massive spacecraft and fly back to the planet Nibiru, never to be seen again? If you ask mainstream science, the whole story is just a myth anyway, so there is nobody to look for. But if you ask the modern military, the fighter pilots, and the intelligence agencies of the world, they are quietly dealing with a terrifying reality right now. The original gods never left. They just realized that ruling humanity openly from giant stone ziggurats was no longer the most efficient way to manage their global laboratory. As humanity multiplied and grew more technologically advanced, the Anunnaki simply moved out of plain sight. They stepped behind the curtain. And today the curtain is slowly starting to slip. For the last 80 years, human beings have been looking up at the sky and reporting strange metallic flying objects. For decades, the government laughed at these people. They called them crazy. They blamed weather balloons, swamp gas, and optical illusions. Anyone who claimed to have seen a UFO was completely ruined in the media and treated like an absolute joke. But then, in December of 2017, the world experienced a massive paradigm shift. The United States Pentagon, the most powerful military organization on the planet, officially released a series of highly classified videos captured by their own elite Navy fighter pilots. They openly admitted on the front page of the New York Times that unidentified flying objects are absolutely real. The military stopped calling them UFOs and started using a new, more clinical term, UAP, or unidentified anomalous phenomena. But changing the name does not change how terrifying the reality is. Let us look closely at the most famous of these encounters, the 2004 USS Nimitz incident. Commander David Fravor, a highly respected Top Gun Navy pilot, was flying his FA-18 fighter jet off the coast of California. His radar operators directed him to intercept an unknown object that had suddenly dropped out of the sky. When Commander Fravor arrived, he saw something that completely broke the laws of modern physics. He described a smooth, white, metallic object shaped exactly like a giant tic-tac breath mint. It had no wings, it had no jet engines, it had no exhaust flame, no rotors, and no flight control surfaces. It was just a smooth, blank cylinder about 40 feet long. When Commander Fravor tried to fly closer to intercept it, the tic-tac did not just fly away. It reacted. It mirrored his movements instantly, and then, in the blink of an eye, it accelerated at a speed that would instantly kill any human pilot. To understand how impossible this is, you need a very simple physics lesson. When a fighter pilot takes a sharp turn at a very high speed, they experience G-force. It is the heavy, crushing feeling of gravity pushing against their body. A highly trained human pilot wearing a pressurized flight suit can survive about 9 Gs before all the blood drains from their brain and they pass out. Military radar data showed that these tic-tac UFOs were pulling maneuvers that would generate over 600 Gs. If there were a human being inside that craft, a 600 G turn would literally crush their bones into powder and turn their body into liquid soup inside the cockpit. Furthermore, moving at that speed through the Earth's atmosphere should cause the craft to instantly catch fire and burn up from air friction, just like a meteor entering the atmosphere. But these crafts do not burn. They do not make a sonic boom. They do not even disturb the air around them. They operate as if they are completely detached from Earth's gravity and physical laws. Does this sound like a secret weapon built by Russia or China? Absolutely not. It sounds exactly like the flying chariots and the whirlwinds described by the ancient Sumerians thousands of years ago. It is the exact same technology, just being recorded on modern infrared military cameras instead of being carved into clay tablets. But the most shocking detail from these modern military encounters is not what these crafts do in the sky, it is what they do when they reach the water. In many of the recently declassified Navy reports, radar operators and pilots watched in horror as these massive, wingless crafts dropped from 80,000 feet in the air, flew straight down, and plunged directly into the ocean. But they did not crash, they did not shatter upon impact, they simply entered the water without making a splash and continued to travel at hundreds of miles per hour deep underwater. In the military, this is called a transmedium vehicle, a craft that can fly through the vacuum of space, the air of our atmosphere, and the dense, crushing pressure of the ocean without changing its shape or speed. This completely shifts the entire narrative. For decades, we have been pointing our telescopes at the stars, looking for alien spaceships to arrive. We have been waiting for them to come from out there. But we have been looking in the wrong direction. They are already here. And they are hiding right under our noses. Think about the Earth's oceans. Human beings proudly claim to have conquered this planet, but that is a massive illusion. Over 80% of the Earth's oceans remain completely unmapped, unobserved, and unexplored by humans. We have better, more accurate maps of the surface of Mars and the Moon than we do of the bottom of our own oceans. The Mariana Trench in the Pacific Ocean is nearly 7 miles deep. The pressure down there is so immense that it would instantly crush a modern nuclear submarine like an empty soda can. It is pitch black, freezing, and entirely out of our reach. If you were a highly advanced race of ancient astronauts, the Anunnaki, and you wanted to stay on Earth to quietly monitor your genetic experiment, where is the absolute safest place to build your headquarters? You would not build it on land, where primitive humans with nuclear weapons might accidentally bump into it. You would build it at the bottom of the deepest, darkest trenches of the ocean. Fascinatingly, if we go back to ancient Sumerian mythology, the Anunnaki chief scientist, Enki, the one who created humanity, was famously known as the Lord of the Abzu. The Abzu was described as the primeval, deep, dark waters of the underground. Is it a coincidence that the ancient god of human genetics was associated with the deep ocean, and today our military is tracking hyper-advanced spacecraft plunging into the very same deep waters? But what happens when human beings accidentally get too close to the truth? What happens when a commercial pilot, a naval radar operator, or a regular civilian snaps a clear photograph or finds a piece of crashed Anunnaki technology? The management does not just let the truth get out. They have a very specific, terrifying cleanup crew. Enter the Men in Black. Forget the funny Hollywood movies starring Will Smith. The real-world phenomenon of the Men in Black, or MIBs, is one of the most chilling and widely reported aspects of the UFO cover-up. Since the late 1940s, right after the famous Roswell UFO crash, thousands of credible witnesses have reported being visited by these bizarre figures immediately after witnessing a UAP. The story is almost always exactly the same. Within hours or days of a UFO sighting, there is a knock at the door. Standing outside are 2 or 3 extremely tall men dressed in immaculately clean, slightly outdated black suits, black fedora hats, and dark sunglasses. They drive pristine, vintage black cars that look brand new, with license plates that cannot be traced. But it is their physical appearance and their behavior that is truly terrifying. Witnesses constantly report that the men in black do not look or act like normal human beings. It is as if they are wearing a human suit that does not quite fit right. They have incredibly pale, almost translucent, plastic-looking skin. Sometimes witnesses notice that they completely lack fingernails, eyebrows, or eyelashes. Their movements are stiff and robotic. When they speak, their voices are entirely devoid of human emotion, sounding like a flat, monotone, computer-generated voice. Some witnesses even report that the men in black do not move their mouths when they speak. They simply project their thoughts directly into the witness's head using telepathy. They often struggle with basic human objects, acting confused by things like a ballpoint pen or a glass of water, exactly like an alien entity trying to navigate a foreign environment. So who are they? Are they just top-secret agents of the CIA or the FBI? It is highly unlikely. Government agents do not look like plastic mannequins, and they certainly do not possess telepathic abilities. Many independent researchers believe that the men in black are not human at all. If the Anunnaki had the biological technology to genetically engineer the human race thousands of years ago, they certainly have the technology to create advanced biological androids today. Think of the MIBs as the modern-day Adamu, but instead of being built to mine gold in the dirt, they are genetically engineered, soulless biological drones designed for one highly specific task: psychological intimidation. They are the cleanup crew for the gods. They are dispatched from deep underground or underwater bases to confiscate evidence, threaten witnesses, and ensure that the human flock does not wake up to the reality of their massive global cage. They use fear and confusion to keep the human worker class docile and ignorant. They will tell a witness in a cold, robotic voice that if they ever speak about what they saw in the sky, their family will disappear. And then the men in black walk out the door, get into their silent black cars and vanish into thin air, leaving no trace behind. We are not alone. We never were. The gods of ancient Sumeria simply upgraded their technology, moved their operations to the deep oceans, and left a network of hybrid elites and biological drones to manage the surface world. But if the truth is so terrifying, and if the elite are working so hard to suppress it, why is it suddenly everywhere? Why is the government suddenly releasing UFO videos? Why is modern culture utterly obsessed with aliens, genetic engineering, and ancient mysteries? As we move into the final chapters, we are going to look at the massive psychological operation currently happening right in front of our eyes. We are going to explore how Hollywood and the media are slowly, deliberately dripping the truth into our minds, preparing humanity for the ultimate, unavoidable reunion with our creators. We have looked at the sky, the oceans, and the dirt. We have looked at the microscopic codes in our blood, but now we need to look at the most powerful, easily manipulated landscape on Earth, your own mind. Have you ever stood outside on a quiet, dark night, looked up at the vast ocean of stars, and felt a strange, unexplainable pull? Have you ever felt a deep, lingering sense of homesickness for a place you have never even been? In modern psychology, doctors simply call this the human search for meaning. But what if it is something much more literal? Unlike any other animal on planet Earth, human beings have an absolute built-in obsession with finding our creator. A dog does not look at the sky and wonder where it came from. A lion does not build a stone temple to honor the sun, but we do. From the very beginning of recorded history, every single isolated culture has desperately looked up, waiting for the gods to return. What if this is not just harmless human curiosity? What if this is an actual physical, genetic memory? If the Anunnaki truly spliced their advanced extraterrestrial DNA with the primitive, earthly hominid, then a tiny, microscopic part of us actually belongs out there. We are essentially an orphaned species carrying the ancient homesickness of the gods in our very veins. We instinctively know that a piece of our puzzle is missing. But here is the massive, terrifying problem for the elite ruling class today. If the government or the shadowy secret societies suddenly went on live television tomorrow and told the absolute truth, if they said, "Hey everyone, everything you were taught is a lie. You were genetically engineered by giant aliens who now live deep in the ocean and control the global financial system," what would happen? It would cause total, absolute global chaos. The psychological shock would instantly break modern society. The stock markets would completely collapse. Global religions that have existed for thousands of years would shatter overnight. People would stop going to their jobs, they would stop paying their taxes, and the entire, incredibly profitable, well-oiled machine of human control would burn to the ground. The human mind is incredibly fragile. You cannot just drop a bomb of truth that massive all at once. So how do you prepare 8 billion people for the biggest reality check in the history of the universe? You do not use a press conference. You use a movie theater. In the intelligence community, there is a psychological concept known as soft disclosure or predictive programming. It works exactly like the old story of the frog in the boiling water. If you drop a frog directly into a pot of boiling water, it will panic and jump right out. But if you put the frog in cold water and turn the heat up incredibly slowly, 1 tiny degree at a time, the frog just gets comfortable. It adapts. Eventually, the water boils and the frog never even puts up a fight. For the last 50 years, Hollywood and the massive, elite-owned media corporations have been slowly turning up the heat on the human mind. They have been drip-feeding us the exact truth of our ancient past, safely wrapped up in the highly entertaining, fictional package of science fiction blockbusters. Look at one of the biggest sci-fi movies of the last decade, Ridley Scott's Prometheus. You do not need a film degree to see exactly what they are showing you. The entire plot of the movie follows a team of human scientists who discover identical star maps carved into caves all over the Earth by completely disconnected ancient cultures. They follow the map into deep space and discover that human beings were genetically engineered by a race of giant, pale, muscular aliens they call the engineers. And the terrifying twist? The engineers are not warm, fuzzy, loving gods. They are cold, calculating scientists who view humanity as nothing more than a biological experiment. Does that sound familiar? It should. It is literally the exact literal translation of the ancient Sumerian Anunnaki texts, packaged with a massive CGI budget and sold to millions of people as pure entertainment. And it is not just one movie. Look at the massive Marvel Cinematic Universe, the most profitable movie franchise in history. They took the ancient Norse gods, Thor, Odin, and Loki, and explicitly explained to the audience that they are not magical, spiritual beings. They are simply highly advanced extraterrestrials with technology so incredible that primitive humans thought it was magic. Look at the iconic television show Stargate SG-1, where the entire foundation of the story is that ancient Egyptian gods like Ra were actually parasitic alien dictators who used humans as slaves and built the pyramids as landing pads for their spaceships. Why are the largest, most powerful media conglomerates on Earth spending billions of dollars to repeatedly tell us the exact same story over and over again? They are planting a seed in your subconscious. They are mentally conditioning the global population. When the day finally comes, whether it is tomorrow next year or a decade from now, when the real creators, the Anunnaki or their modern hybrid managers, finally pull back the curtain and reveal themselves, humanity will not riot. We will not panic. The psychological shock absorber has already been installed. We will simply sit on our couches, point at our screens and say, "Oh, I've seen this before in a movie. I already know this story." The manipulation of our psychology is almost complete. The stage is perfectly set. But if the stage is set and the human worker class is finally primed and ready, what happens when the play actually begins? What happens to us when the ancient cycle repeats itself and the wandering planet Nibiru finally swings back into our neighborhood? We have reached the end of this massive journey. We have traveled from the dusty clay tablets of ancient Sumeria through the twisted ladders of our own DNA, across the impossible stone blocks of Puma Punku, and right into the hidden boardrooms of the modern elite. The puzzle pieces are scattered all over the Earth, but when you step back and look at them together, the picture they form is undeniable. But this leaves us with one final, ultimate question. If the ancient texts are right, and the massive planet Nibiru is on a 3,600-year elliptical orbit, what happens when the clock runs out? What happens when that cosmic boomerang finally swings back around the sun and enters our neighborhood once again. According to ancient traditions, the return of Nibiru is never a quiet event. A planet of that massive size entering the inner solar system would drag a tremendous gravitational pull along with it. Some independent researchers look at the extreme weather events happening on Earth right now, the sudden shift in global temperatures, the melting ice caps, the unprecedented volcanic activity, and the rapidly shifting magnetic poles, and they ask a terrifying question. Is this just natural climate change? Or are we feeling the early, distant gravitational ripples of a massive, unseen giant slowly approaching from the dark edges of deep space? If they do return, what will they find? Will the Anunnaki masters expect us to hand over the keys to the planet and bow down to them like primitive slaves in the dirt? Will the modern elite, the blue bloods, who have been managing this global farm for millennia, simply welcome their ancient bosses back to the boardroom? Here is the most important, inspiring takeaway from everything we have discussed today. It does not matter. Whether we are the slow, accidental product of Darwinian evolution, or whether we are a genetically engineered hybrid species created in an Anunnaki biological laboratory, one truth remains absolute. We are no longer just a passive experiment. We have outgrown the petri dish. We are no longer primitive hominids hitting rocks together in the mud. We have mapped our own genome. We have split the atom. We have built our own incredible flying machines. And we have sent our own robotic rovers to explore other planets. If the ancient gods gave us our vast intelligence simply to make us better gold miners, they made one massive, fatal miscalculation. They made us too smart. They gave us the spark of true consciousness, the ability to question, to rebel, and to completely choose our own destiny. The DNA flowing through your veins might have extraterrestrial origins, but the choices you make with your life belong entirely to you. You are not a slave to the past, and humanity is not a slave to the stars. The true story of our ancient origins might still be hidden in the shadows, but the future of this planet is standing right here in the light. We hold the power now. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible, reality-bending exploration. If this journey opened your eyes, make sure to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and share it with someone who needs to see the bigger picture. Never stop questioning what you were told and always keep looking up. Until next time.